to be able to talk about an issue that sometimes people don't want to talk about. And really, there's kind of two issues here that often people would like to avoid the conversation. But I do believe that especially in our current day, there is an all-out assault on truth, on life, and what it means to be a patriot in America. I personally believe that if we do not stand up, if we do not speak truth, I believe that we are going to have to apologize to the next generation and generations to come. My friends, when we are in a society where people want to pretend they don't know the difference between a woman and a man, we know we have problems.
Right.
So that is why it's incumbent upon us to be committed to the pursuit of truth, whether it's convenient or whether it's inconvenient. That said, I would actually like to begin with a story of how I began to really speak out on this issue. You see, I did not grow up in the United States. I was actually born and raised in Europe. I was born in Germany, and our family lived in Germany for several years. We also lived in the United Kingdom. We lived in the Netherlands, France, Monaco, Belgium, Liechtenstein, as well as Switzerland. So that was all we were used to, was growing up in Europe. But then we moved to the United States. And when we moved to the United States, our eyes were significantly opened. Because it was when we came to the United States that it seemed like everything was about the color of someone's skin. And we found it to be very problematic. Because growing up in Europe, honestly, in all the different countries where we lived, nobody cared what color we were. They wanted to know, what language do you speak? So they could communicate. But it's in the United States that it seems as if everything revolves around color, which I think we need to reject that ideology. But it was a couple of years ago, so I was speaking at a large conference, and there was a line of people there to ask questions, and I noticed some of them crying, and it was a whole family. And it was the mom and the dad, and I saw the siblings, and they had a lot of kids. I was like, whoa, there's like 15 right there. Clearly, they're very pro-life. But they had all these kids. And I said, oh, look. I said, you guys have been out in the sun, haven't you? It looks like a wonderful day at the beach is what I was thinking. You know, because I could see that the little boy was all sunburned. And that's when the mom said, no, she's like, that's what I want to talk to you about. And I said, okay. She's like, you see, normally I have to bribe my son to shower. Normally we have to give him all kinds of things. He just doesn't like to take a bath. She's like, but this particular morning, 2 days ago, she's like, when I got up, he was already up. He was already in the shower. And I went, made breakfast. He was still in the shower. And she said, I just could not understand what was taking him so long. He was only 6 years old, had just recently turned 6. So she knocked on the door, was like, what's going on? And she could hear crying. And as she opened up the door, he just kept saying, Mama, I can't get it off. I can't get it off. The teachers at school said that whiteness is bad and I cannot change it. I can't. And she's like, what? She's like, what are you talking about? She had no idea. She had no idea that at this school, that is what they were being taught. He actually was using hot water. He had scraped his skin. He literally had burns on his face from trying to scrape his skin, because that's what he was being taught at school, unbeknownst to mom and dad, that whiteness is bad and he needed to get rid of it. So this little boy, who clearly was traumatized, and I was glad that mom and dad were there and they brought the siblings, but it was disturbing that that is what's being taught in our schools today. He said, Mom, he's like, I can't go down the street to play with the kids. He's like, they're not gonna like me anymore because I'm white. And she said, no, honey. She's like, we have to, and that's when she looked at her husband and said, we've got to do something. We did not know this is what our kids were being taught. They said that was the first time that they said, you know what, we're gonna go to a school board meeting to know what our kids are being taught. But you see, that actually opened my eyes. We know this has been going on for quite some time. I think it depends upon the state in which you live. You see, I've recently relocated to St. Louis, Missouri. It's about an hour outside of St. Louis, but I used to live down in South Florida, in Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale. Not too far, about an hour away is Miami, and there you would expect it. But this was more in the Bible Belt, and she said I was absolutely stunned. But here's what I want us to consider. When we think about critical race theory, I want us to consider, what is critical race theory doing to America? What is it doing to the next generation? What messages are they learning? What ideology, what worldview are they receiving? Furthermore, how are they looking at themselves, and how are they looking at other people? You see, I believe that when we look at what critical race theory is actually doing, I believe it's turning us into the divided states of America, not the United States of America. In fact, I personally believe that when you think of critical race theory, I like to say CRT doesn't stand for critical race theory, but what it stands for is creating racial tension. Because I believe that is actually what's happening, and whether people would like to acknowledge that or not. Now, again, coming from an outside perspective, if you come from Europe or you come from another country where color was not the most important feature about you, it is crystal clear what's going on in this country. But if you were born and raised here, I've come to understand that for some people, that literally has become their entire identity, sadly. And so that is why today, when we talk about critical race theory, I have a couple of goals. One, just to give an overview of what critical race theory is ultimately about. I'm going to also give some examples of how it is in our schools, whether people recognize that or not. Because it's easy for people to say, oh, that's not in the schools. I promise you the ideas are definitely there, and it's what I call undercover. They might call it by something different, but it still is there. And then we're also going to look at how critical race theory is being used to advance abortion in our country, especially since Roe v. Wade was turned back to the states. The language that's being used is clearly racist, as you will see, but it also creates women, and it creates this idea that women of color are somehow victims, and therefore they must have access to abortion. But also I will be debunking all throughout some of the most common objections that you hear that basically suggest that, this is why we should have critical race theory. Ideas such as America was and is still a very racist nation. So I will be going through all of those, but I also want to remind us, when we pursue truth, when we look at our country, when we look at some of the leaders that weren't afraid to speak truth, I'm reminded of Martin Luther King. And how many of you agree with this statement? That I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the what? The content of their, how many of you believe that's important? And that's what we should be striving for. My friends, when you have someone look at you, when you encounter someone, do you want them to truly give you the benefit of the doubt and actually get to know you? Or do you want them to make all kinds of assumptions about you simply based upon the color of your skin? You see, that is what critical race theory does. It takes us and it divides us into groups by the color of our skin. And based on that, it imposes specific ideas and beliefs. In fact, if we kind of take a drive through history and look at the history of critical race theory, it actually stems from what was called critical theory. Critical theory, if you think of from Karl Marx, but also Antonio Gramsci, it's also called the Frankfurt School, were all instrumental in creating critical theory. And essentially what it did, think of Karl Marx, think of socialism, communism, and think of the divide that they had. Remember when they actually had the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, remember? So that division where it basically took the oppressed and the oppressor. And that's what happens when you have this ideology. It divides the country into two groups, the oppressor and the oppressed. And so critical theory will assign victim status or power status according to different labels. During the time of critical theory initially, and of course during the time of Karl Marx and communism, it was the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. But after that, what we saw with Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Mr. Delgado was a professor and also wrote a book called Critical Race Theory, but they're the ones, specifically Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term critical race theory. Think of it this way. It basically means that they're going to look at everything through the lens of race or color. Everything, they're going to look at it from that perspective of, well, wait a minute, how was racism present in this situation? So essentially, they're looking with a fine-tooth comb, with a microscope, where do I see racism in every single one of these situations? Now, because this stems from critical theory had several offshoots, not just critical race theory. Check it out, they have queer theory, they have cultural studies, they have gender studies, they actually have feminism theory. Did you know there's even something called fat theory? I know, how exciting is that, right? But this whole idea, there's all kinds of theories that are offshoots of critical theory, where they're looking at the world through whether it's the lens of gender, or the lens of being fat, or the lens of being a feminist. And from that, they attribute some type of victimhood status. Now, what are the four main beliefs? And this is what's really important. So if you have your smartphone, feel free to take pictures of this, because this is the foundation of critical race theory. These are the four main beliefs, or the four core tenets, that those who acknowledge or refer to themselves as critical race theorists, you have to push back and remind them these are the main core tenets of critical race theory. There's actually 7, but I've condensed it into these 4. The first one being, critical race theory asserts that the most important thing that determines our identity is skin color. Again, the most important thing about you is your skin color. But they also, critical race theory divides us according to the oppressor and the oppressed, again, based upon skin color. Number 2, critical race theorists assert that racism, and this is a big one right here, number 2, that racism is permanent and it's always present. Think about that. It's permanent. That means they don't believe that even if somebody was a racist, they don't believe they can change from that. They believe that if an individual's racist, they're always racist, but they believe that all white people are essentially racist, which you will see. That's why they believe